Hello, good afternoon to everyone, and good morning or good evening to those joining us from outside the UK. This is, of course, still season one, episode 6 of the People and Culture Talk Show. Thank you so much for joining us wherever you are. I'm your host, Jonathan Rodrigues. I'm also the coordinator for the Institute of Organizational Dynamics, which is a membership think tank of the TCM group. The People and Culture Show is aimed at bringing to you the unscripted, unrehearsed conversation on matters that are relevant to a healthy, happy, and a high functioning workplace. Joining us today, of course, are three exceptional professionals who will be sharing their insights on a topic that's sometimes quite hard to address, but I think it's even harder to be regretting if it's not being addressed. I am getting a little echo. Let me just fix that. Hope that should fix it. Anyways, a warm welcome to Marie Coombes, who is joining us from Sheffield in England. Marie is an award-winning mediator, conflict resolution specialist, HR professional, coach, mental health first aid instructor, and a lived experience speaker. Marie is also a principal resolution consultant at the TCM group. Thank you, Marie, for joining us today.
Hi, nice to be here. Thanks, Jonathan.
A big hello to Colin Harper, joining us from Stirling in Scotland. Colin is a respected negotiation and communication coach, a graduate of the FBI's Quantico program. Colin is a former police hostage and crisis negotiator with over 16 years' experience negotiating and advising in numerous high-risk situations. Thank you for joining us, Colin.
Great to be here. Thank you for the invite.
And also, a very good morning to Clare Fowler, joining us all the way from Eugene, Oregon, in the United States. It's 5 a.m. for you, Clare. Thank you so much for making it today. She is the vice president of media.com. And being vice president basically translates to being the lifeline of one of the oldest international mediation websites and service providers. Besides being a trainer and chief editor, Clare is also a mediator by profession, and her practice focus lies on workplace conflict. I am getting a slight echo still. I'm not sure why that is, but I'm just trying to check with the speakers. Are you getting the same feedback on your side?
No, not getting any feedback at my end, Jonathan.
All right, that's great. Let's move on then. Great, no worries. I just want to get started actually and jump straight into the topic. Having said that, I would like to start off with a bit of an apology regarding some of our recent communications that I had put out regarding this program, and I forgot to mention trigger warning in that conversation. And of course, today we'll also be talking about mental health, self-harm, and suicide. So at any point of time, I know that you all have voluntarily joined us, but at any point of time you're feeling uncomfortable, feel free to get off this session, and you can always come and view it at some time when it's more appropriate and convenient for you. But I did learn from that episode where I did put out a communication, and I forgot to mention trigger warning, which also kind of made me understand the weight of the responsibility when you're addressing a topic like this. I'm a wiser now, of course, but this brings us to that first conversation, or that first ice-breaking, I would say, issue that I would like all our speakers to address today, and that is how important it is to be kind of, I would say, making these conversations quite normal, and at the same time, making sure that they are addressed the right way, the right time, and the right place. And Marie, if you could start us off on this, that would be lovely.
Yeah, so we always deem suicide as a subject not to talk about, because we think talking about it's going to put that idea in somebody's head. And actually, the complete opposite is true. It needs to be a conversation that people feel comfortable to have, but also take into account sort of the context of suicide. Suicide is a medical emergency. It's a medical emergency up there with things like heart attacks and physical medical emergencies, and it should be treated as such. So if somebody is exhibiting signs of suicidal ideation or has said to you that they are feeling suicidal, don't shy away from the conversation. It has to be a conversation that people are willing to have. The biggest tip that I will give in terms of having that conversation is by asking them outright. It shows you care, and actually it can bring somebody back from the brink, just knowing that somebody cares and has taken the time to take an interest.
Yeah, Mary, thanks for sharing it, and I mirror exactly what you've said there. I know in my own experience, it can be the elephant in the room at times, and people can be uncomfortable actually approaching it. Actually, even people using the word, "Are you feeling suicidal? Are you considering suicide?" People think that the likelihood is they're going to put that idea in their head, which you all know that it isn't the case. So it's very much about that, broaching the subject and dealing with the elephant in the room. And certainly, my point of view, is making the time to have conversations with them. I think at times that we can ask them comments, and the classic can be in the UK, "How are you feeling?" "Oh, I'm fine." And it's just brushed off. It's about then, if you're going to actually start that conversation, have the time and be prepared to show that support throughout.
And just on that, the advice I always give is ask twice. Don't just stick at the first time. Find out, how are you really?
I love it. I love it. Jonathan, you were asking about the importance of normalizing this conversation, and we just had our mediation and mental health conference. So of course, everything that we talked about there is fresh in my head. But during this conference, we heard so many examples from people around the world saying that that they had attempted suicide, or that that they were going to attempt suicide, but they were just hoping that one person. And we saw a suicide note after suicide note that said, if just one person today sincerely asks me how I'm doing, or if I need help, or if they offer help, then I won't go through with it. And that just, when you hear enough of those stories, that just sticks in your head, and it reminds you that that sometimes we might be that last person that would be willing to say, "Hey, are you okay?" And as Marie and Colin just said, I think it's very socially normal when someone says, "How are you doing?" You're like, "Oh, I'm not doing so well today." And then we follow it up with our own experience. Like, "Oh, I get it. I'm having a bad day too." But how horrible is that, right? Somebody is just crying out for help, and we just completely minimize and squash their experience instead of saying, "Oh, tell me about it. What's going on? Can I help? Has something strange happened in your life, or is today worse?" And just start to ask some follow-up open-ended questions to let people know, hey, this is a safe space. I am truly interested and curious, and I want to have this conversation. So thank you, Jonathan. Great question.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Being the last person who could make that change and who could make the difference between saving someone's life at that point of time, or not making that difference. Because I think it's not always that the writing is on the wall. It's not like you're going to go around seeing someone about to take that action. Sometimes it seems like everything is fine, and we have seen this in pop culture. We have seen this in people who are close to us, our friends. Maybe it could be friends, it could be people we have heard about or read about, complete strangers. And sometimes the writing is not on the wall. I mean, you really don't know. And so the question is then, what are those signs? What are those signs are we looking for? And I know that Marie's already said that ask twice, of course, because you can't see those signs sometimes. But I'm also trying to kind of focus this towards the workplace scenario, because we at the Institute for Organizational Dynamics, we want to try and focus on creating the spaces for workplaces that are focused and interested in creating a nice, safe, healthy working environment. So from a workplace, I think I would say perspective and lens, what are the signs we're looking for as colleagues and as co-workers?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's a kind of a list of signs, but the key ones to be looking for is somebody behaving differently to how they have been behaving. Are they more down than usual? Are they more irritable than usual? Have you noticed a change in their appearance? This may be just a sign that their mental health isn't great, and it's certainly an opportunity to open up and start asking those questions. But it could also be a sign that something else is going on as well. So they may be seeming sort of very flat. There might have been the life and soul of the team meeting, and then you have another team meeting with them, and actually they're really quiet, or they're not maybe as talkative as they have been previously. You could be sat next to somebody and you notice that they're putting in a lot more hours than they would normally do, but maybe not being as productive. It's those kind of things that are out of the ordinary for that person that could be a sign of anything going on, and we should be sort of saying, how are you at that point?
Yeah.
Thanks, Mary.
Some of the common things that I have seen in the workplace, or that I have heard coworkers bring up, if you see a severe lack of disengagement, right? If somebody was excited and then you're noticing, like Marie said, a shift in behavior. So if suddenly they're not signing up for the company picnics anymore, they start showing up later to work, it seems like they have been drinking, or they're just living on caffeine, like I am today, but it's different. It seems like one of the common themes there was just sort of this lack of hope, right? Like, why bother? I don't know if that's going to work out, or just that sort of despondent feeling. That's a lack of hope.
Sort of defeatist.
Yeah, certainly from my experience, I read a study that I think 1 in 5 people have considered suicide at some point. So I think to touch on what Jonathan was saying is that it's not always that obvious with it. And certainly in my days as a crisis negotiator in the police, about 45% of the crisis intervention incidents we were called to when someone was considering suicide, when we managed to actually start to have the discussion and start to peel back the layers, understand some of the challenges they were facing, not always, not exclusively, but common, it was about a change of role or a loss of role was a really common factor. Break-up marriages, lack of access to kids, pressures brought about by work. So there was always some aspect around the role would actually be a trigger point on it. And I think just almost touching what Claire mentioned as well is that my experience has always been that simply because someone is suicidal, it's not necessarily that they want to die. It can simply be the fact is that they see no other way out. And it's about that conversation and not necessarily problem solving for someone, but how you can then actually listen to them. And then it's that thing, if they get an opportunity to speak about it and showing that someone cares, actually listens to them.
Yeah, I've been in the unfortunate position of being actively suicidal myself, and also supporting my husband who was suicidal. And in having the conversations with him at the time and since, all he wanted was for the situation to stop. And it was the only way he could see to get the situation to stop was to end his life. So it was only when I broached the conversation, let's get you some help, let's see what help looks like for you, let's see how we can support you in sort of coming out of that and getting it to stop, that the suicidal ideation backed off, and he was able to see just a glimmer of hope and be able to move forward and get past those feelings.
Thanks for sharing that, Marie. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marie.
Yeah, thanks, Murray, and thanks all for sharing those few, I would say, those signs that we need to be more aware of in the working environments around us. There's some of the questions that came in while we were prepping for this episode. I know that this has almost been a month in prepping for that we were supposed to have this, and one of the questions was not always the signs you see mean that person is feeling suicidal or even is contemplating suicide. It could be someone who's just going through a really low phase and is fighting through it, but has no intention at all of self-harm, right? These conversations, this initial conversation, or even saying how you're feeling, there has to be the right approach to that. And not all of us are trained suicide first aiders, and we'll get to that as well. Why it's such a valuable additional, I would say, value to your CV to have that first aid training. But even if we don't have that, for those who don't have that, and who do not have the capacity to invest in something like that, how important is it to when you approach the subject with somebody who is struggling, to do it the right way? Because you cannot be assuming things when there's nothing there, when there's no thought of suicide or no thought of self-harm. Someone's just going through a low phase and they're just getting through it. What's that balance? What's that balance when you're trying to trying to be considerate, compassionate. You want to reach out, just ask how they're doing, and making sure you do not cross the line and don't over, I would say, insist or persist with that questioning.
Mm-hmm. So when you're ready to broach that subject, right? When you're ready to, now I'm hearing an echo too.
I think what we'll do is just mute ourselves. So let's see if that works. The others.
Okay. When we're not speaking, that sounds great. Yeah. So I think whenever you get that sign that somebody's not okay, right? If you ask, oh, how are you doing? Oh, I'm having a really bad day. And so then you know that you're going to follow up with some additional digging in questions. I think the answer is always that you're speaking to people with the utmost amount of respect, that you're letting them know this is a safe place. You're letting them know that this is a confidential conversation. And Jonathan, to your point about how do you have that conversation without going too far or without pushing in too deep? I think as long as you are respecting someone, like you can never respect them enough. You can never show that you care enough or that this is a safe space enough, right? So I'm not concerned about that. I always want to show people above and beyond. I care. I want to have this conversation. I really am interested. And then I think as mediators, this is where we can really bring our superpowers, right? This is where we can help and say, well, let's talk through it. What's the problem? What's going on? Let's brainstorm some suggestions together. Oh, that does sound like a really hard conversation. What if we approached it like this? Or what if you brought it up this way? And you just start to brainstorm with the person and let them know that you're coming alongside them and that you want to help. Obviously, this is a complex issue. I am not saying that just having a difficult conversation will solve everything. But as Marie just mentioned, often people are feeling suicidal because there's that problem that they can't work out, right? There's that obstacle that seems insurmountable. And if you have someone coming alongside you that can help you talk through it and help you figure out a path to work around it, then sometimes that might be what they need to get through that difficult space in their life.
The biggest tip I can give anybody broaching this conversation is you need to leave yourself at the door for the purpose of that conversation. And Claire hinted at it earlier on, ask somebody how they are and you jump immediately and, oh yeah, I'm going through a tough time as well. You need to leave that part of yourself at the door and be there in an empathetic space. And be there in that moment that you may not understand why they feel that way, whether it's a mild issue or something more severe as suicide. You might not necessarily understand their truth, but for them it is their truth, and it's taking that time to understand that it's a big thing for them, and to take the time to support them in that moment. I mean, mediator skills are absolutely a superpower, but there are so many of our skills that we have that can be easily translated to mental health conversations, and particularly the conversation around suicide. The mental health first aid course teaches similar skills.
Thanks, Marie. Yeah, thanks for that, guys. All I would add to it is if you are identifying the signs, where possible, do a bit of preparation. And what I simply mean by that is it's not necessarily a conversation you want to have in an office corridor. So it's about finding an appropriate location. And then probably the 3 top tips I would just suggest is about don't minimise it, the situation. Don't be judgmental. And again, don't problem solve too early. We've covered that already about it's not about you, or don't try to force solutions on them. It's about let people talk and then take it from there.
I want to add to that, Jonathan. I'm sorry. I think you're ready to move on to your next question. But I think a lot of our responses when we start hearing that somebody is going through a tough mental health time, a lot of our responses are really short-term fixes. Like, oh, go take the day. Go, let's just sit on the couch or watch Netflix, or let me bring over a bottle of wine and let's talk about it. And those are great if you're just having a bad day, right? But if it's something that is an ongoing problem, then all of the things that I just mentioned only make the problem worse. And so I think Colin just brought this up, that this might not be a hallway conversation, but taking it seriously and saying, oh yeah, this seems like a this seems like a long conversation. This seems like something that you really do need help working through this with somebody else. I'm sorry you've had to carry this on your shoulders for so long. Can I take you out to dinner tonight? Let's talk about it. And just making it clear, this isn't a short-term fix. I understand that just going and getting a donut isn't going to make everything better. Yeah.
I know Colin said that this is not, of course, a corridor conversation, and it is appropriate to find that space of trust to have this conversation. However, Colin, I just want to kind of take a step back here and also kind of tap into your experience as a crisis negotiator. That's a different skill set altogether, and sometimes you face a situation on the spot, and I'm wondering how much of your training from that background you bring you would bring to a situation like this, where say not all of us are fortunate enough to have that conversation early on with somebody, and we have kind of reached we have encountered a moment on the spot, unfortunately. How and I know that we do a lot of this in suicide first aid training, but from your experience in training as a crisis negotiator, what do you need to do as a person who's encountering a situation like this where somebody is about to take that unfortunate action?
Certainly my experience is that the one thing I always found probably pleasantly surprised about was, given the subject matter, was that not everybody who is necessarily suicidal will want to complete suicide. At times, the fact is that feeling of despair, depression, can't see a way out, at times can be temporary. I don't mean that the depression or the thoughts go away, but that point of actually wanting to end your life at that time can be temporary. And it's about when you can tap into someone. And again, the skill we use, it's called active listening. And the key is in the title. It's about listening, because as Claire said right from the off, is that it might simply be the case that no one has ever listened to these people, whatever the circumstances. They feel alone, isolated, lack of affiliation, lack of recognition, no appreciation. The list could be endless. So what you find on a number of occasions is when we have found people in crisis who are considering ending their life or seriously harming themselves, it's simply because giving an opportunity to listen to them. And that's where rapport and empathy comes in. And it's about giving them that support and talking to them, however long that may be, and letting them create a level where they trust you. That isn't a quick thing, it takes time, but trust is the kind of key part on the teeter-totter, the seesaw, where they're comfortable talking about you. And then at some point you can start to signpost what opportunities there are going forward. But the key here under the circumstances is about listening to the individual and not problem solving, and giving them opportunity to share their concerns. And at some point, hopefully, some element of rationality or optimism may come into it. At least the fact is there is something to live for. Because without being blasé or blunt about it, on most occasions when we've dealt with someone who is considering suicide, you can almost without exception find a reason to live. It may be temporary, but be it family, friends, whatever the case may be, and it's not for me or a negotiator to come up with that solution, but it's to talk it through with them, to try and find them a reason where it's maybe not as dark as you think it is at this moment in time.
I just wanted to add to that, just in terms of the listening. I don't know if Claire and Colin have found the same, but as a mediator, being in that mediation space is often the first time these people have truly felt listened to. And I've lost count of how many times people have admitted they are actively feeling suicidal, or have felt suicidal, or getting to a point where they just don't know how they're going to deal with the situation. And often as a mediator, I'm the first person they've told.
Yeah, exactly. Harvard's program on negotiation, they have this exercise that people go through when there's an active situation and somebody's about to cause harm, and they tell their students the theory about you have to actively listen and not judge and put yourself on the shelf, as Marie was just saying, and they tell them the theory, but then they have them in that moment. And in the negotiation, you have someone who's locked on the other side of the door, again, about to cause harm. And the person is trying to negotiate with them, or trying to help them to come out. And it's interesting how, as the anxiety starts to raise, and as the person who's trying to help doesn't know what to do, they often resort to these to things like, oh, you're going to be fine. Everything's going to be okay. Oh, no, it's okay. I've been there before. You'll get out of this. It's okay. And again, just continuing to put themselves in that situation. And they have people go through this experience so that they're aware of, this is my go-to. My go-to is I'm trying to insert myself. And by doing that, I'm actually judging the other person a little bit, like saying, oh, if I were in your shoes, I would be able to handle that. And so it forces people to understand that in times of duress, we might resort to these techniques that are not helpful. And the only people who can, I guess, win or get a good grade on this negotiation are the ones who continually say, well, tell me more. Well, what's going on? How can I help? Can we have a conversation about that? That does sound really difficult or frustrating. And they just continue to pull themselves out of it. And instead of judging, they just continue to say, well, what's going on? I'm interested. I want to know more and more about that. And it's one of those experiences where it sounds good in theory. And I think we have to practice it a little bit, so that when you are feeling nervous and you're not sure what to say, you don't resort back to techniques that are not helpful, but instead you're like, okay, I want to continue to be present for you and be respectful and be curious and be helpful.
Just to add to that, Claire, I think a very dangerous word in these circumstances is someone saying that I understand. Because the simple fact is, unless you've walked in those shoes, you don't. So that's that thing is about, yeah, we may try to be empathetic, sympathetic, but it's a really dangerous word. And that's where it is, tell me more. And again, some listening skills around just actual labeling how you see the person's feeling. You seem down, you seem low. Those are really quick ways of letting the person know that you're engaged with them, you're focused on them, and they're the focus here and not you.
Those are really, really interesting, I would say, sharings, Claire, Colin, Marie. Thank you so much. There's this, I still feel like there is still a cultural roadblock to a lot of this coming out. Not every culture is open to talking about it. And when I say culture, it could be different things. It could be something that's dealt with religion. It could be gender. It could be age. It could be a lot of things that's kind of preventing somebody from, I would say, living in denial and not accepting that he or she or them are going to this phase, right? And I think that's because I remember having an experience in the mediation clinic at Strathclyde in Scotland, where we finished a mediation. It was a small claims dispute. It was done in 3 hours, and at the end of that mediation, the gentleman said, I have been going through hell for the last year and a half, ever since I lost my better half. And, I had thoughts of giving up. And I very well knew that he wasn't talking about giving up on the case, because he was fighting that, very hard. So he was obviously thinking of giving up on life. And he said that, I'm so glad it's over. But he never used the word suicide, of course. He never said self-harm. He never said mental health, but he said it in a different way. So there could be a lot of cultural roadblocks that way, I would say, that come in the way. And especially from, I would say, especially in times today, with economic uncertainty, so many other things bothering us, with a health crisis still, I would say, around us. How important is it for workplaces, for leaders, for managers, for HR professionals to create that environment where they can actually, where people can come and talk about this without being judged, without being branded, without being labeled? How important and how can they do it, I would say. Marie, if you could also talk about that the first aid training, I think if you can just also touch upon that would be lovely. But yes, open to all of you.
Yeah, so just picking up on the cultural aspect, The cultural aspect has a big impact on what workplaces should be doing. 3/4 of all suicides are men. In the UK, 3/4 of all suicides are men, and I'm guessing that's probably replicated across the world. I'm glad to see Clare. The kind of environments where men work are the ones that generally are not as mental health friendly, shall we say, as they possibly could be. So they tend to be working in sort of labour intensive type of roles. Construction is particularly a particularly difficult environment for people to work in, and the suicide rate of construction workers is also of concern. There's also the healthcare industry that has a very, very high suicide rate in comparison with the national average in the UK. And it's because they're the kind of environments where there is no time to talk, or you are so focused on helping other people that you don't get the space and the time to take time for yourself and to sort of have the conversation with somebody. So providing outlets for support is hugely, hugely important. Mental health first aid is something that I will bang a drum about all day long, because what mental health first aid training does is it gives people exactly the skills we've been talking about. So the active listening skills, how to support people in crisis, whatever that crisis may be, how to help people not get to a crisis situation. But the key thing for me in any workplace environment is to walk the talk. So often, oh, we've put this well-being scheme in. Yeah, it's going to be great for everybody. It's going to make everybody feel really, really good. And then there's no follow-up to it. Or it's there's a room over here with some beanbags in it. You can go and sit in over lunchtime. That's going to make everybody feel better. Here's access to the Headspace app or the Calm app. That's not getting to what actually the root cause is, which brings me on to workplace culture. What we should be tackling is workplace culture and making it an environment where people have the space to talk and know that they're going to be listened to, whatever that culture looks like.
That's good. There are definitely some other cultural aspects to this, right? I'd say in a lot of churches, unfortunately, people in any kind of religious community, people have to put on this face of, oh, I have everything together and everything's fine. And, oh, my life is great and I'm so lucky. And so unfortunately, it isn't really discussed, and there isn't that safe space to discuss it. Thank goodness that's starting to change, but very slowly. And as Marie said, there is definitely this element of toxic masculinity. And there was this case in France about a decade ago now, where the managers were running their workers to the point where they kept saying, come on, aren't you man enough? Aren't you tough enough? Stop complaining, get back to work. And after the 9th person in their workforce committed suicide, then thank goodness the French court stepped in and jailed the managers for assisting in their deaths, and said, this is the culture that you have created led to this. And it started to bring about some awareness slowly, thank goodness, but it's getting there. And at school, so I'm a professor. One of my students came up to me after class and mentioned that he was in a place where he was not doing well. He just wasn't okay. And, I felt like, oh, I don't know. I feel like I might be crossing a line here as a professor. I don't know if this is really the right time or place, right? Because again, we're kind of in a work environment. And so I said something like, oh, I'm so sorry. Let me know if you ever want to talk more, right? Something kind of flippant like that. And he never came back to class. I never saw him again. And I've never been able to reach out to him again. And, and those experiences stick with you. And so I've kind of reached a point of saying, I don't care anymore. I don't care if it's the right time or place. I don't care if it's socially or culturally awkward. Like if you can help just one person, why not be the one that makes a little bit awkward by showing them how much you care and how much you respect them and how far you are willing to go and put yourself out for this person.
Just going back to the workplaces in the UK, the Health and Safety Executive now recognise that mental health safety, psychological safety, is no different from physical safety. And there was a landmark case in 2008 where an employer was actually found liable for employees suicide, because it was foreseeable that the environment they were working in contributed to that situation. So as employers, we have a duty of care for the people who work for us mentally and physically, to keep them mentally and physically safe.
No, thanks, guys. Again, probably I would just like to very briefly add to that, is that I think what's really important, and again, it's been touched on, that is if you have concerns about someone, I don't think any of us would like to be in that position where we could have done something, should have done something. And whilst you might not feel comfortable speaking to them yourself, if the suicide first aiders or mental health champions that you can approach and at least share your concerns about an individual, at least that gives you the confidence to then go and speak to them, or at least actually broach it or take it forward, because you don't want to be in that position where you went, I could have done something about this. This could have been avoidable.
Thanks, guys. I think another question that I just want to pick on very quickly. I know we are kind of hitting our 40-minute mark, but a very interesting question, a very important question, actually, because a lot of cultures still. I'm not. I don't have the full research on this, but there's still a few cultures who still criminalize the act of attempting suicide. India itself, back here, we decriminalized it just a few years ago. And so for someone who has gone through that phase where they have attempted it and they're coming back into society, how important it is to now create that space for them, which is once again feeling safe, once again feeling like they belong, once again feeling like they can talk about it and they're not seen as criminals, or they're not seen as someone who's strange. So one of the questions that's come in from the viewers is how do you bring this topic up with somebody who has attempted suicide and who has gone through that phase and struggled through it and survived through that phase? How do you kind of should your behavior be different, or just how do you deal with situations like that?
It's just a continuation of what you would do before. It's giving them that space to listen, creating those safe spaces, and if in doubt, ask them what's going to help. Take your judgment about any situation out of the equation altogether and ask them what they need from you, what they need from their surroundings in terms of that support. A key thing as well is the language. There's been a massive language shift in the UK only in the last 10 years, where we no longer talk about committed suicide. We are very sort of straightforward and direct with it. They've died by suicide or they've attempted suicide. The language is very, very clear and moving away from that criminal act. But it shocks me actually how many countries it is still classed as a criminal act. And it is just about creating that safe space, regardless of what culture they're in, what their views and values and beliefs are. It's all about creating the safe space. And if in doubt, ask them.
Awesome. I think we are nearing the end of our session today. Thank you so much once again, Marie, Colin, Claire, for coming on and sharing your thoughts, your experiences, your insights on this. I think the message, if I could summarize this, is to not be afraid to approach that subject, not be afraid to address it. It's better addressed than you regret not addressing it and it's too late. But address it respectfully, address it with empathy, and as I think one of the speakers said, I think it was Marie, to make sure that you leave yourself at the door and make sure that you let them know that you are available whenever they want to speak to you. I would like to thank my internet for not giving up on me today because I was really worried about that. But having said that, we are not going to give up on this subject. I think the Institute of Organization Dynamics is very, very committed to talking about this more and having more of these insights shared. This was such a fantastic session. Once again, Colin, Claire, Marie, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.